Exodus 4:10 through 17. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you. He will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so that you can perform the signs with it." Moses does not want to return to Egypt. Moses does not want to go to Pharaoh and his magicians to demand the release of Israel from captivity. The most incredible thing is that God has appeared to him in a burning bush. After 40 years in the mountains of Midian, minding his own business, looking after sheep, Moses sees a bush that does not burn out. It goes on burning and burning and burning. And out of this perpetual burning bush, God appears to Moses. Out of this perpetual burning bush, God speaks to Moses. Now, it is a perpetual burning bush because God is the holy, eternal, and everlasting God. Moses is a mere human being. God tells Moses, "I've heard the cries of my people Israel, who are slaves in Egypt. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses does not want to return to Egypt. Moses does not want to go to Pharaoh and his magicians to demand the release of Israel from captivity. So this is how Moses answers back God. Exodus chapter 4 verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." And I think if we were to be honest, this is not only Moses' problem, it is also our problem. Every Sunday I ask my church family to pray for someone in their life who might need God's gracious intervention in their life. And sometimes in that prayer, we ask God to give us words to say or help, ideas in terms of helping that person, if God is calling us to do that. Yet at the same time, we tell God that we are not eloquent, that we are slow of speech and tongue. We do not know what words to say. And how does the Lord answer Moses when he says that he is not eloquent and is slow of speech and tongue? Exodus chapter 4, 11 through 12. The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and teach you what to say." I think that the problem is that we think that our task is totally our own. We fail to see that if we help people in our lives, it is God who is helping us truly and not us. We are mere servants of God. We help people because God is helping them. We are the hands of God to that person. We are the voice of God to that person. I think that at the end of the day, Moses is afraid. He was once a prince of Egypt. Now he is a mere shepherd in Midian. Moses knows how eloquent and powerful Pharaoh and his magicians are. He also knows that he is a criminal in Egypt. He killed an Egyptian guard about 40 years ago. Moses doesn't want to return to Egypt. Moses is afraid. He asks God to send someone else. He says no. Exodus chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him." Now, did you pick out some sentence in those verses that I've just read? Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. The God of the burning bush burns with anger against Moses. God could have cancelled out Moses when Moses appeared to be very stubborn in front of him. Remember that he is the God of the burning bush that goes on burning forever and ever. And remember, Moses has stubbornly given 5 excuses. Once I was cooking using our gas stove. I had finished cooking and put the pot away at the corner. And I removed the pot from the stove elements. Then I began to prepare things for the other dish. I was so busy that I forgot that the stove elements were still hot. Accidentally, my wrist touched the elements and I got burned a little. And today I still have this small scar on my wrist, reminding me about my lapse of memory about the hot burning elements on the stove. I am now very careful around our gas stove. And as I read Moses in Exodus chapter 4, I wonder if he really understands the heat of the burning bush. He seems to be very stubborn before God. He seems to refuse God's request to him. Now, it also says that the Lord's anger burns against him, but miraculously, God does not burn Moses out. Instead, what does God do? God brings someone from Moses' past to help Moses and to be his spokesperson. God calls on Aaron, Moses' older brother, to go to the desert and meet Moses there. God brings Aaron out of nowhere to help Moses to bring God's message to Pharaoh. God does not burn Moses out, but instead, God sends Aaron to help him. Last June in our church, we were having difficulty when it came to people helping us on the audio system of our church. Patrick and Robert formed a great team covering each other on Sunday mornings. When Patrick did not do the audio system, Robert did, and they changed roles on the Sundays after the other. In June, Patrick was not doing too well health-wise. He was suffering from cancer. He could not make it to church on Sunday mornings, let alone help us on the audio system. And as his wife Barbara was looking after Patrick, she also could not help us by volunteering in the church office on Tuesday and Friday mornings as she usually does. And it so happened that at this time, Mike was in between jobs and volunteered to help us in the office, where Barbara was at home looking after Patrick. I knew that Mike had interest in music as we talked about it previously. I also felt that Mike might have some spare time to help us in other things. Therefore, one Friday morning when Mike was helping in the office, I asked him if he could step in for Patrick and work with Robert on the audio system. He told me that he was more than willing to do so, and that he had experience in the past working with a karaoke sound system. And Mike has been working with Robert since then. This was an answer to prayer. In some ways, the Mike and Robert team functions like the Moses and Aaron team, bringing God's message to us. And when God calls us to do something, even if it's at the basic point of praying for people to serve our church on the sound system, even when God calls us towards that kind of ministry, he empowers us. And God brings Moses or Aaron alongside Moses so that both Moses and Aaron can speak God's message to Pharaoh and his officials. So even when Moses gave his excuses, God was still gracious and still empowered Moses by sending Aaron to come alongside him. The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." Exodus 4:11-12. Moses says that he's not eloquent and that he's also slow of speech. But the God of the burning bush is a speaking God. And this speaking God wishes to speak to Pharaoh through Moses and Aaron. And Moses forgets that it is God who is speaking through him to Moses. He lets self get in the way. And Moses does not really know the might of the God who asks him to speak to Pharaoh and his magicians. And as the verses we've just read says, he is the God who gives human beings their mouths. He is the God who makes them deaf or mute. He is the God who gives them sight or makes them blind. And I know that sometimes it is very difficult to read these verses, but we need to believe that we are mere human beings and there is an ultimate being named God who is sovereign beyond all the struggles and hurts of life we experience. God created Moses in the first place and saved Moses' life while Pharaoh was killing all the baby boys of Israel, as reported in Exodus chapter 1. And it is God who got Moses to Midian to save him from Pharaoh 40 years ago when he was a murderer. The God of the burning bush does not burn out Moses. Instead, the God of the burning bush empowers Moses to speak for him. And despite Moses' stubbornness, God still sends him to Pharaoh with the help of his brother from the past, Aaron. God says to Moses, "I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." It was 1995. I was teaching English as a second language ESL classes in Vancouver. 5 years earlier, as part of my studies at Regent College, I started church planting in southeast Vancouver. Now, the church plant did not occur. It turned into, you guessed it, an ESL class ministry to immigrants and refugees in southeast Vancouver. And I also need to say that I grew up in a church tradition in Malaysia which did not believe in the practice of calling full-time preaching pastors. We took turns to preach as lay people. They did believe in elders, but there was no employed preaching elder among them. In 1988, I went to Regent College in Vancouver for my theological and biblical studies. I planned to do a 2-year master's degree to get myself equipped for the rest of life. I was planning to return to my home church in Malaysia as a well-equipped lay elder. However, God provided the way for me to do more studies beyond the 2-year degree. I got involved with my home church in Vancouver, and they asked me to do some church planting for them as an intern. And this internship provided funds for me to move from a 2-year master's program to a 3-year Master of Divinity program. I loved studying the Bible, and I took up this opportunity because this Master of Divinity degree allowed me to do more biblical subjects. And so in 1995, when I was teaching ESL, I realized that I was making an impact on my students. They said that I was helping them pronounce the words better. despite their limited vocabulary. And I told them that the most important thing for me was not to make sure that they memorized their vocabulary, but to instill in them a confidence to speak even more English when their vocabulary was limited. So slowly God was confirming to me that I had the gift of teaching. And in that process, I also realized that perhaps God was calling me to become a pastor, a full-time teaching and preaching elder. I loved teaching and speaking in public, and I loved the Bible. However, I had to get over my church tradition, which did not believe in full-time pastors. And some of you might think that this is a minor point because you believe in full-time pastors and you grew up with them. That is true. As my mother used to say, one man's meat is another man's poison. However, we need to realize that sometimes we struggle in one thing that might be very clear to others. And so, wouldn't you say the same thing to Moses if you were saying to him, if the bush is burning and God speaks out of it, wouldn't you think that Moses should seriously think about God's request to him and not remain stubborn before God? It took me 6 months to struggle through my church tradition. And as I struggled through this, I kind of realized that there was another reason that God made me do the Master of Divinity. Remember the 3-year study program? At the time when I did the Master of Divinity degree, I did it because I wanted to do more biblical subjects. But the Master of Divinity is the basic degree that sometimes one need to apply for full-time pastor positions in most of the Christian denominations. And it's the same with Moses right now. Moses is being called by God to do the thing that is going to characterize the rest of his life, to be the prophet who liberates Israel out of slavery in Egypt. And Moses is now about to realize that what has happened in the past is going to help him in the present and will definitely help him in the future. God tells him about Aaron, his brother who is 3 years older than him, whom he grew up with in Egypt. And now God is bringing Aaron into his life again, so that Aaron can be his spokesperson as he goes to Pharaoh to demand the release of Israel out of captivity in Egypt. Moses' past now has developed some meaning in his life, and he is going to rely on God's provision of Aaron for the present and indeed for the future as he goes back to Egypt and demands the release of Israel from captivity. So God is equipping Moses despite his stubbornness, despite his excuses. God says this to Moses: I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. And I say to you, God is also calling you to some task of speaking for him. And it doesn't mean that you need to preach a sermon for 20 minutes. It might mean calling someone and saying, hello, how are you doing? And God might be calling you to do that. And God is saying those same words to you. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say.